Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, folks. We are back with the one and only and legendary investor, Anna Kelly. How you doing, Anna?
I'm great today. Always a good Wednesday to be here with you, Michael.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that. You and I have been doing this a long time. You know, we've been investing collectively for about 40 years, which means we started before the crash. We've seen the crash. We've both been in the financing world for a long time, right? You were actually in the finance world at a large organization. And which means we understand how balance sheets work and income statements and all of these other things. And I wanted to talk about Wells Fargo and something they did recently. They canceled credit lines, and it sent all these shockwaves out there, and all these people claiming the end of the world. And you know, there's a YouTube channel out there talking about, see, I told you, the biggest housing bubble is going to explode. It's going to explode in this year. All because Wells Fargo canceled their lines. And I'm like, oh my God, this is so much not like last time. You guys are they're looking for signals that repeat last time. And that's not how black swans work. They're not mirror images of each other. And frankly, Wells Fargo doing this is all about them being bad actors, getting caught and suffering penalties. And people, they just don't get it. It drives me crazy. Everybody wants to say the world is ending. And this is just one company who was a bad actor being punished. It's kind of funny.
Yes, yes. So much to take in with all of that. So, it's funny because I worked for First National Bank in Texas, which got bought by Wells Fargo. And so that's how I knew about Wells Fargo in the early 1990s, early 1990s. And Wells Fargo during that time has been in numerous, scandals, if you will, numerous things that they did that the feds came in and say, this was not right. This was not fair. And one of those things was they were opening accounts fraudulently in people's names that didn't give them permission to open accounts. And there were significant penalties. I don't remember the dollar amount, but it was pretty hefty. I think it was about $1 billion.
Oh, it was big. Yeah.
So essentially, once that happened, and this was just the latest in a string of things that they had done that somebody thought was a good idea that really was not. Yeah. So basically, they have constrictions on what they can do and on their balance sheet. And the feds are very uncomfortable with banks growing too large, for one, and then doing these kind of things. And so all banks have some federally mandated restrictions on the type of portfolio they have, how much money they can have into lines of credit versus auto loans versus mortgages versus CDs and all types of things. And so there's restrictions on every bank. But when you have a bank that has significant penalties they have to pay, and they're having to kind of reorg their business and gain some of that goodwill back in society, they have to make tough decisions about what lines of business are they going to stay in and what lines of business are they going to come out of. And part of that is the balance sheet issue, but part of that is the profitability issue. And personal lines of credit, generally speaking, there's no interest paid while they sit there. So unless they're being used, they're not making interest. And when they are being used, because rates are so low right now, and these lines of credits typically track wherever interest rates are. So they vary every year based on the interest rate, and interest rates are really low. So Wells Fargo has these lines of credit, and they're personal, by the way, not commercial, not real estate related. They're personal lines of credit, which is basically like a blank check or a credit card that you can go out and buy whatever you want because you have a line of credit, and we're only going to charge you, let's say, 3.5% interest. It's not wise when you're in a recession at all for any bank to be willy-nilly handing out credit lines. And so I'm sure that there is some of this decision had to do with risk based on us being in a recession and a pandemic and not wanting people to just go on a spending spree. But there's so many things that go into it that, to your point, we can't just say, we see this one thing, so it's the indicator that it's all going to blow up, right? In recessions, banks do tend to pull back. They tend to tighten a little bit. And we've seen this throughout the pandemic. And it's a normal thing that happens in recessions. It's not necessarily a sign that there's going to be a real estate market crash. They're totally independent of one another to some extent.
I mean, there's so many things I want to talk about here on this topic, but the first thing I want to talk about is I've been watching the banking industry for the better part of 3 decades, and all banks have different risk profiles, right? Their leaders, some are more conservative than others. And if you're going to look at Wells Fargo and basically say they're being the most conservative bank out there, you're wrong. They are by far not the most conservative. I would definitely call Jamie Dimon and JP Morgan Chase the most conservative, a la 12 or 14 months ago when Jamie basically came out and said, we're going to stop lending, right? JP Morgan basically said, we're not going to take any new loans for a while we figure this out. And oh, by the way, we're going to take 10 billion in loan loss reserves because we're not sure what's going on, right? If Chase did this, it might have been a sign of, oh my God, they see something in their loan book, they see something going on. But this wasn't Chase. This was Wells Fargo, which by my opinion is probably the most aggressive bank, i.e. they've been caught lots. So that's the first thing you need to realize is, I mean, they're just different. Would you agree with all that?
I do to some extent. I just want to throw one caveat in that. So I think where the sky is falling, people have got it maybe wrong. The sky is not falling. Mm-hmm. We are wise to watch signs and see what signs might be, accumulating to point to something being a little bit amiss. And I will say that combining this with the fact that you do have Fannie Mae, for example, who's kind of pulling back on how many loans they will do to investors and on short-term rentals and tightening credit scores, they are seeing that there's suddenly this huge abnormal frenzy into wanting to get into short-term rentals and investment properties while interest rates are low. And they are seeing values kind of teeter up. And maybe perhaps they're a little concerned that because there's an eviction moratorium, if people can't pay and there's new investors coming into the game that really don't know what they're doing and values come down a little bit, there is a little more risk. So I think when you take all these things together, I think it does point to where we are today that all of us know. We're coming out of a pandemic. Businesses have been shuttered and are slowly coming back. We were in a recession, whether we are still or not, is up for debate. Some things are different than they have been. And anytime that it's different, banks go, is there risk here? Should we pull back? Let's be a little conservative. And they're usually behind the 8 ball about 6 months. So they do something today that they anticipated and planned 6 to 9 months ago, a year ago, because of what they saw then. So it's kind of a trailing indicator. It doesn't necessarily mean they see what's happening in the future. They could be reacting to what we just had in the recent past. And they're just trying to let's de-risk a little bit our balance sheet, the types of loans we do, and just be really careful. But if they were really worried about a real estate bubble, they would stop lending on single houses.
Absolutely.
To homeowners and single family rentals. And I'm not seeing that happen at this point.
Yeah, that was another thing I wanted to talk about is banks, historically speaking, the big banks, they're not great predictors. They're great reactors.
Yes.
Right. So when you have this people saying Wells Fargo is canceling credit lines, the world's going to end. He actually said the greatest bubble ever to be worse than last time happening this year. And I looked at my watch going, dude, this year's like 5 months old. Right? It's got 5 months left. What are you talking about? We will be positive for the year in housing appreciation. I have no idea. But again, people like fear, all of that. So again, banks are reactors, not predictors, historically speaking.
Yeah.
And then the last thing I want to talk about, because again, I was an accountant for years coming out of college. One of the things that Wells Fargo has on them is a limit to how big their balance sheet can be, right? A physical number. I actually tried to look it up. No, but I couldn't find it quickly, but it is. There's a cap. You cannot be bigger than this because that's one of the penalties. So as you know, when people get a credit line, the bank takes the entire number of the credit line as an asset, right? 100 grand for me, 100 grand for you. It's 200 grand that they have to recognize as an asset. And oh, by the way, as you correctly said, I don't use it. You don't use it. They get 0 interest.
Right.
But their balance sheet is up 200 grand, producing 0. Wells Fargo is in the business of making money, right? They make interest, positive interest carry and all of that.
Right.
So when they look at their business and they're bumping up against the cap, canceling credit lines is a good business move, right? If you're a Wells Fargo shareholder, you should cancel those because they're producing no money.
Yes. Yes. That's true. And I'll say this, I've seen a lot of, they don't care about the little person. And here's the reality. One little person, no, they don't, because they're not in it to service everybody. They're in it to service the people that they want to service, that is profitable and that meets their risk profile. And
Yeah.
so, they've made the decision that in order to clear up their balance sheet on this side where they can be profitable,
Yeah.
they have to clean up and reduce their balance sheet on the other side. So it doesn't feel good when it happens to you. And the sad thing is it will impact people's credit scores to some extent.
For sure.
Unless
Available
credit
balance.
agencies make some kind of exception for this. And I don't think it's big enough that they're going to do that,
No.
but it reduces your available balance. So whatever you have left on balances, it increases your utilization and your scores will go down a little bit.
Yep.
But they are in the business of doing what's right for them. And, this was just a business move. The other thing that I'll just say real quick, because you mentioned it, I don't want to forget, is the thought that there's going to be this humongous housing bubble because of this.
Yeah.
We've talked about it a little bit before, but the reason that it's different than last time, there's lots of reasons it's different than last time. But in the last recession, we were in an oversupply, a housing oversupply. And so right now we are housing undersupplied in a great deal of the United States. And again, we talk about all the time how housing is very regional and it's not consistent everywhere. But in many major markets, especially in the South, where a lot of migration is happening, we're undersupplied by millions of houses, where it could take 10 years to build enough houses for the people that are moving in and housing demand. So what's interesting is where certain markets were teetering on that hyper supply before the recession and pandemic. Now that so many more people are coming into these areas, especially again in the South, suddenly that hyper supply has gone way back down to undersupplied. And so with rates low, and even if they tick up 1% or so, even if they tick up 2%, we're back to 2017, 2018. So there's not going to be this huge housing crash because you still have so much demand and limited supply. And that's what really teeters on a major crash, is when there's so limited supply there's so much supply and limited demand, then prices have to fall. And we're certainly going to see that in certain areas that have been artificially bumped up, especially, Florida. I'll pick on Florida because I love it and I'm looking for a short. Well, they're up 200%. I can guarantee you they're coming back down. The question is when. But the rest of the United States is not the Florida coast, right? And so you just have to, when you hear these sky is the falling things, listen to the good pieces that, we need to keep an eye on this kind of stuff and think about where our risk can be and try to mitigate it. But we don't need to go, oh my goodness, we're out of the housing market. Like, let's just give up and stop because it's all going to crash, because that's not going to happen.
Yeah. I mean, we could literally, again, nationally speaking, we could double housing inventory tomorrow and we still be undersupplied of listings, right? Average is 3.3. I think last checked is 1.2 and growing. We're just going to have a housing slowdown, right? It's going to go from 15% appreciation to 8 to 4 to 2, or, something like that. It's not a crash. I can't believe he had the gall to say there'll be a crash this year. I'm like, if there was going to be a crash this year, it would already be happening. Real estate does not move that fast.
Right. Yeah. And again, it comes down to, the word crash is scary, right? Anytime that you have an artificial increase in demand and limited supply, which we do have in certain markets, right?
For sure.
Then you are going to have significant increases that aren't sustainable, that don't reflect really where the market is, other than for those outside factors that are temporarily changing consumer reactions, right? What we're going to buy. So I believe we will come back to more reasonable prices where we have this steady growth instead of some markets are way up here. People are stopping making offers in a frenzy, 30, 50 above asking, when people are already overpricing their homes. I think that's going to slow down a little bit. But that's not a crash. That's just kind of equalizing some artificial blips in housing frenzy in certain small markets. But I think houses are going to continue to go up in value in general, as long as we have this imbalance with not enough housing compared to the people that want houses in most of the country.
Yeah. Again, folks, I was shocked at how many videos came out in the last week when I was on vacation. pointing at Wells Fargo signaling a housing crash. Not, believe me, Wells Fargo won't be the bank that causes a housing crash. It's just not going to happen. So Anna, thank you very much. I look forward to episode number 3, where I share with you a landlord survey that I think will be interesting. Thanks, Anna.
Thanks.